Chapter 102, Sages and Devils. Gong Gai Cheng is already in his 50s, his face is very thin, and his body is as thin as a withered branch. The appearance looks unremarkable, with a goatee on his chin, a pair of eyes that reveal some old spicy people who can see through people's hearts and are good at planning, and a grey cloth robe is worn on his body, and even reveals some old age, making it hard to believe that such an inconspicuous person is actually one of the famous two gentlemen of the heavenly sect, a strategist with a very high status by the side of the sect leader. He has been in the heavenly sect for almost 30 years. There are countless things that have been experienced by the side of the sect leader, and it can be said that he has long been accustomed to seeing the situation and is not surprised. It's just that when Xie Wei's people came to the door and asked him to come over to talk about it, this scheming man still smelled a little unusual. Gong Gai Cheng is not afraid of danger. After all, although the head of the sect has raised this person for 20 years and even adopted him as a righteous son, it seems that he regards it as his own and trusts him very much, but Xie Wei's life experience is special after all, and to what extent does this trust go? I am afraid that it is not good to make assertions. He's just a little troublesome. But people have already come to the door, where can they not go? And during this period of stay in Beijing, Gong Gai Cheng really found some bad clues, and he was also thinking about finding an appropriate time to knock Xie Wei, so that he could remember what his duty was. So, he came anyway. Please come in. Xie Wei heard a faint sound from the piano hall. Just like when Gong Gai Cheng occasionally saw him in Jinling, nothing has changed over the years. As soon as the thought turned, he walked in. The sword book stood outside the door and did not enter. There was some dim light outside the Qin hall shining in from the window. Xie Wei was wearing a snow-white robe, and only used an ebony hairpin to tie his hair, and most of it was draped behind him, revealing a kind of casualness and leisure at home. A tea set has been prepared. He looked up and saw Gong Gai Cheng, asked him to sit down, and smiled. I heard that Mr. Gong Gai arrived in the capital a few days ago. I still don't believe it. I think if Mr. comes to the capital, he will probably tell Xia a certain sentence. Unexpectedly, Mr. really came. The core forces of the heavenly sect are all in the south. The capital is located in the north, and the power of the imperial court is deep, and the further south it goes, the weaker the control becomes, which is also suitable for the heavenly sect to preach and develop its power. Gong Gai Cheng is often in Jinling. As for the capital, it has always been a place where the strength of the heavenly sect is weak. But since Xie Wei went to Beijing to take the exam a few years ago, especially since he returned to the capital 4 years ago to plan to help Shen Lang ascend the throne, such a person has become a secret stake for the heavenly sect to enter the imperial court, and even has grown stronger and stronger over the years. As a result, the power of the heavenly sect was able to secretly develop in Beijing, and it is now quite large scale. It's just that here, Xie Wei is the one who speaks. It stands to reason that Gong Gai Cheng, who is also a person in the sect, came to the capital, and he should say hello to Xie Wei no matter what, but he didn't. Gong Gai Cheng sat opposite Xie Wei, and raised his eyes to look at him at this moment, as if he was trying to figure out the deep meaning behind his words, but his mouth was extremely direct. The sect leader has a life, he is in a hurry, he is busy coping, and he forgot it without paying attention. Besides, didn't you already know? Xie Wei poured the boiling water into the teacup. Gong Gai Cheng looked at the flowing white water, and said lightly, when I arrived in this capital, there were ears and eyes everywhere, and there were still people who wanted to ask if I should ask you to show me if I wanted to tell you. Xie Wei's hand holding the pot paused, and said, Mr. Gong Gai's words are serious. The whole heavenly sect respects the head of the sect. If there is an order, it must be obeyed, and if there is an order, the head of the sect will be as heavy as a mountain. How dare you trespass in danger? Gong Gai Cheng laughed coldly. Really? Xie Wei put the kettle of boiling water back on the stove, His face did not change. He turned around and poured tea for Gong Gai Chen, and said, Wei Ziki is not harmful to the heavenly sect. Gong Yuchen's gaze suddenly became sharper. He stood up, paced 2 steps, looked down at him from a relatively high position, and said, How can you explain the things outside the 2 cities of Tongzhou and Fengtai? Xie Wei took a sip of tea and raised his eyebrows. What's the matter? Gong Yuchen looked at him as if he didn't know what was going on, and finally felt a wave of anger rise from his chest, and his voice became a little sharper, and he reprimanded, The Dog Emperor made a mistake to deal with the Yanji Marquis mansion, which can incite the people's hearts and cause chaos in the world, and can even use this to win over the forces in the army and strengthen our sect, which is really a God-given opportunity to subvert the imperial court. The water used to make tea today is too hot, and the tea soup that comes out of the brew scratches the tip of the tongue, leaving a slightly astringent taste. It's winter, and the new teas of spring are all on hold. Xie Wei slowly put down the teacup in his hand, and when he raised his eyes, he looked at Shang Gonggai's gaze, and smiled slightly. Oh, there is still this matter? Since Mr. Gonggai entered Beijing, he didn't dare to interfere in the affairs of the sect, and all the affairs were taken care of by Mr. Gonggai, but I really didn't know that such a big thing happened. Can you find out who did it? Looking at each other, Xie Wei's eyes and expression were extremely peaceful, but Gong Gai Chen was tightly tensed, and his whole face was full of indescribable solemnity. Even though the well water never interferes with the river water, Gong Gai Chen always seems to have a bad deal with Xie Wei. He felt that the head of the sect had made a mistake in this move, and he should have cut down the grass and eradicated the roots back then, and should not have left such a person, and let him go to such a high position in the heavenly sect, and even let him go to the capital where the forces of the heavenly sect were difficult to penetrate. Lure the wolf into the house, and let the tiger return to the mountain. Gong Gai said, That's really strange. I still think that Du Jun and the Yanji Marquis mansion have a lot of relationship after all. This time the little Marquis crown ceremony you also went to crown it and take the words, It looks like you miss the old love, and then think that you are dissatisfied with the plan of the heavenly sect, secretly obstructed, and feel that the sect leader is too cruel. Xie Wei said, Mr. Gonggai has misunderstood. However, when he said this, he did not look directly at Gonggai, but turned his eyes to look at the withered grass and trees in the courtyard, and then got up and walked to the window. My ambition is the same as the ambition of the head of the section. That was before, and I thought I knew. Now that you have arrived in the capital, you must know that people's hearts are changeable. Gong Gai Chen laughed mockingly. The government and the opposition and even the entire capital know that MRCA is very favored by the saints, and he has even taken charge of the Hanlin Academy not long ago, and his position is becoming more and more stable. I'm afraid that if I wait for another 2 years, I will not only have the name of the emperor, but I am afraid that even the reality of the emperor will be soon. Glory, wealth, and charming eyes, who still remembers the oath and the will made back then? There are delicate carvings on the window lattice, which is quite a bit of Jiangnan atmosphere. It's just that Jiangnan doesn't have such a cold wind and such a big snow. There was a flower goose resting on the side, but there were no fresh branches at this time, and only 3 arrows were stuck in it. Xie Wei reached out and picked up one. Heavy in hand, the cluster of arrows is made of dark iron, and the body of the arrow is traced with fine silver lines, but the feathers of the arrow are 2 delicate pieces of gold leaf, embedded in the tail of the arrow. This kind of thing, which at first glance looks a little flashy, at a glance, you can tell that it is about a gift from a colleague in the DPRK and China. He twirled his fingers slightly. The arrow spun around. Xie Wei said, Mr. Gonggai's words don't believe me. In this way, the case of Yuyi in the palace is also the handiwork of Mr. The jade Ruyi dedicated to the Empress Dowager Xiao is engraved with anti-party rumors. A turmoil caused a disturbance that damaged his arrangement in the inner palace, and his 3 or 2 years of hard work were ruined, and he was forced to cut off his tail in order to protect himself. Having said that, I finally have a bit of a tad feeling. Gong Yuchen burst out laughing when he heard this. He lifted his robe, sat down again, picked up the tea, but said gloomily, I ruined your arrangement and moved your manpower, you are really dissatisfied. Xie Wei came to the front of the tea table, and behind him was the empty wall used to face the wall, and only said, if others ask for something, they will be attracted by me. Most of the errand workers in the palace are from poor backgrounds. The Yanji Marquis mansion is a loyal martyr, defending the family and the country, and can be called the pillar of the society. Mr. Gong Gai has assisted the head of the sect for many years, giving advice, strategizing, and preaching, but now he came to the capital to make a fuss about the Yuruyi case and involved many innocent people, and he wanted to trap the home mansion in a disloyal and unrighteous place, ignoring his life. Dare to ask, sir, do you still remember the oath you made and the will you made? Okay. It's time to tell the truth. Gong Gai Cheng couldn't help but stroke his palm, but when he looked at Xie Wei, he had a little more contempt. A few months ago, when the sect leader sent me to Beijing secretly to understand the situation and preside over the overall situation, I was worried. I was afraid that you would lose my heart because of your wealth, and second, I was afraid that you would be too deeply involved with the home mansion and the benevolence of women. I thought you were a person who took care of the overall situation, but I didn't expect to be all of them in the sect's words. Xie Wei looked back at him and didn't answer. Gong Yuchen's eyes were cold, and even his voice revealed a bit of coldness, and said, don't you forget, who spared your life back then, and who made you have everything you have today. Since you know that the heavenly sect treats you like a mountain, you should know where you are. The first thing to do in the sect, how can you have room to put your beak? Xie Wei still didn't say anything. The arrow was at the tip of his finger, and there was no temperature. Only the golden arrow feathers, reflecting the dimming skylight, refracted a little light. Gong Gai Cheng's tone was no longer a talk, but a reprimand, and he asked himself that he was older than Xie Wei, and that his qualifications in Tianjiao were deeper than Xie Wei, and he was qualified to teach him such a lesson. There was even a hint of threat and warning in the words. After this time, Xie Wei will definitely lose the trust of the sect leader, because he will not put Xie Wei in the same position as himself, and said awe-inspiringly, helping the poor and helping the poor, the world is the same, but it is just a doctrine to attract people's hearts. In order to achieve great things, what is it to sacrifice a few insignificant people and sacrifice a brave and resolute marquis's mansion? In the troubled times, the saint is just a waste, and only a hero in this world can be subverted. In troubled times, the saint is just a waste, and only the hero can be subverted in this world. Xie Wei didn't speak for a long time. It wasn't until the gold foil feather on the arrow in his hand no longer refracted the light of the sky that he slowly said, you're right. Gong Gai Cheng talked a lot, and finally took a sip of tea, moistened his throat, and didn't look back at his expression, but said, from now on, you won't interfere in the teaching affairs of Beijing. He was only halfway through his words when the back of his head suddenly weighed. Xie Wei walked behind him at some point, stretched out a hand, pressed his head hard without warning, and slammed into the tea table. Crackling. The tea set piled up on the tea table suddenly fell into pieces. Not to mention that Gong Gai Cheng is old, he didn't think about the danger he would encounter when he went to Xie Wei's mansion today, because he didn't think about Xie Wei who had been in the heavenly sect for many years and dared to do anything shocking, and he couldn't react at all. Everything is in the blink of an eye. Xie Wei's face was expressionless, the arrow in his hand coldly pierced Gong Gai Cheng's neck, and the sharp arrow made of Suan Tai pierced out of his throat, and the force was so great that it nailed the person to the table, and the blood veins on the side of his neck burst and spurted out a large stream of blood, splashing his whole body white. Gollum. Gong Yuchen's throat made some strange sounds of unknown meaning. His eyes widened in horror, and he struggled frantically, stretched out his hand, grabbed Xie Wei's hand and covered his throat, as if he wanted to save his lost life with this weak effort. But how futile it was in the eyes of this indifferent man. Unwilling, dare not believe. Gong Gai Cheng's mouth was bleeding, and he glared at him deadly. Dujun. You. However, it was very vague and could not be heard clearly. Xie Wei seemed to be in a trance, remembering the tall cherry tree in the Yanji Marquis mansion, and said slowly and softly as before, "You're right. A saint can't do anything, what the world wants is a hero. Those who follow the rules always have to walk a little harder. So, what rules do you still follow? What others do, he also does, and he will do it more ruthlessly and absolutely than others." At the end of his life, Gong Gai Cheng finally realized something, and also realized the meaning of Xie Wei's words. But there was no time to think about it. It's too late to regret it. The blood that bubbled out of his neck was no longer as violent as before, as if the spring that had been gushing had slowly dried up, and became calm. Up and down the tea table, a piece of dripping. Gradually ran out of breath. The blood that was still warm spilled under Xie Wei's feet, and he didn't move a step until the thin corpse under his hand stopped moving, and he slowly let go. The face of the sage, but the hands are stained with blood. When he turned around, his snow-white clothes were already shocked, and when he raised his eyes, he saw Jianshi standing at the door, looking at him in shock. Xie Wei lowered his eyes, only walked over and picked up a clean towel on the desk to wipe his hands, and said flatly, "Clean it up."